Rose of Dawn is back, although I guess back is a little bit inaccurate for someone who uploads as regularly as she does. This video is almost a month old at this point. But I just came across it. Who has a cervix? Trans stupid. Now, as we all know, Rose of Dawn is one of those trans women who believes that anyone who has not gone through what she has to transition is not sufficiently trans, or who is not willing to go through what she has to transition is not sufficiently trans. So let's take a look at her trans stupid here. And see what she has to say about cervixes. Surprised that anyone doesn't know, trans women have cervixes too.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Trans Stupid, the show where I take a look at the wonderful, magical, fantastical world of LGBTQIA+++++ news, because stupidity is intersectional. So you're probably noticing there's a little bit of a different setup this week. Well, just to give you a little bit of an update on where my life currently is, I've now moved out of the hellscape that is central London. I'm currently hiding away in North Wales for the next couple of weeks before getting my own place again. So just for the time being, get used to this backdrop, get used to this nice big comfy chair as we just take a bit of a chill and go over what you are all here to listen about, which is, of course, the insanity that has been going on in 2020 with the fantastic world of intersectional identity politics. And the first story that I'm going to talk about this week...
I should create a dog whistle counter for Rose of Dawn videos, or many of these idiot right-wingers, because she has used intersectional as a slur functionally, at least twice now. It's insane. For those who are somehow unaware, intersectional just means that you recognize that different axes of oppression can intersect, hence the term, hence the name, and impact a person in multiple ways. Now, this isn't, as many people try to claim, some sort of oppression Olympics where or oppression points where you get 5 points for being trans and 3 points for being a woman and 10 points for being black or something stupid like that. No, it's recognizing that a black trans woman probably has experienced more oppression, and there's more to do to bring them up to parity than a white trans woman who has also experienced more oppression, and thus more work needs to be done to bring them up to parity than a white cis woman who has experienced more oppression than a white cis man. Like, it's not about woke points or oppression points or anything ridiculous like that. It's not anything so regimented, but it is recognition that there are different axes of oppression, and that you can't fix systemic issues by focusing on one axis. You can't look at just, okay, what are the problems with women, and fix those issues and ignore the issues with race or with sexuality or transgender identity or what have you. So her idea that this, and it's also worth noting that intersectionality is a key component of modern sociology. So her rejection of it is literally rejection of the science of sociology. So that's fun. Of course, it's not a huge surprise that she's rejecting the science of sociology, given that she does that with her transmedicalism as well. Of course, she's also rejecting the science of biology in doing that. But, an intersectional approach to takedowns of turfs like her is important.
I'm going to pose you all a question. What do you call an individual with a cervix? Don't.
A woman. They can be a trans woman, they can be a cis woman, but a person. Well, okay, no. Let me change that. You call them a fucking person, because there can be trans men with cervixes, since they may not have had bottom surgery, given that it's much more difficult to surgically create a fake penis than it is to surgically create a fake vagina. So no, let me change my answer there. There is no one word for people with a cervix, just like there's no one word for people with wombs or one word for people with penises. Depends on how they identify. It's very simple.
Don't answer that. Like, I know my viewers are probably sitting
oops.
back thinking, I know this, but be careful, because if you say anything, well, you're probably transphobic. This, of course, relates to a CNN tweet posted a few days ago where they mentioned individuals with a cervix are...
Yeah, I accidentally did a transphobia there, sorry. But I corrected myself and realized my mistake. Individuals with a cervix are now recommended to start cervical cancer screens at 25 and continue through age 65. Okay, yeah. What problem are you going to have with this? Whoo, boy, look at that ratio. 12.1k retweets and comments to 4.8k likes. Whoo, boy. Hint, it's because they said individuals with a cervix instead of women.
Now recommended to start cervical cancer screenings at 25 and continue through to age 65, with HPV testing every 5 years as the preferred method of testing, according to a new guideline released by the American Cancer Society. So note the way they started that, individuals with a cervix. And naturally, CNN is not the only news outlet, or indeed the only kind of source out there that now refers to people with female anatomy just as being individuals with insert issue here. In fact, you've seen a lot of discussions coming from medical bodies, coming from politicians, coming from basically public figures, acting as though we now have a whole new language that nobody else has really opted into except for the hyper woke. This is a huge issue, and
there's a reason why they've come from medical professionals and scientists. Why this new language has come out, because the science of transness, of being transgender, of transitioning, the science of sociology tells us that calling all people who menstruate women is incorrect. That there are men, trans men, who menstruate, who can get pregnant, although I think taking male hormones, taking testosterone, will interfere with that, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible for a trans man to be fertile. Similarly, I don't believe that a trans woman who has been on hormones, who is still on hormones, is likewise fertile, from what I understand. I could be wrong on that, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that people who menstruate are just people with vaginas. They're generally assigned female at birth, and for the overwhelming majority of them, they're also women. But there are quite a few men, trans men, who menstruate, who have cervixes, who could potentially bear children.
naturally CNN received a ton of backlash, including recent woke crusader Piers Morgan going back to his old usual self. The reason why this is such a problem is because over time you'll see language progress, and that is often the argument you will hear from trans activists, or indeed the woke left, that words do change their meanings, and that is naturally true. But that's not really what's happening here. Instead, we're seeing more that words are changing their meanings based on a committee that nobody really has any kind of input into. And then as soon as the
God, I hate this fucking conspiracist language that a lot of these turfs and other uh, idiots like this use, where they act like there's some shadowy cabal. It's one step removed from the fucking Jewish question here, where there's this shadowy cabal of people who get together to decide, okay, now we're going to take menstruation away from women. It's no longer just a women's issue. This will punish the women. No. As our understanding of society, of gender, of how our society has developed, has advanced, so has our language. So this is the thing. A lot of TERFs pose themselves as the real progressives. They're defending women's rights, and they want to keep women safe and whatever. No. What these people are doing, what TERFs are doing with these trans exclusionary radical feminists are doing, is they're trying to turn the clock back. They're trying to ignore science and sociology and the studies which back up these changes in language. They want to set language in stone that has never been set in stone in the history of the world. What is expected of a man or a woman has changed in living memory. I remember when I was a kid, I know I've told this story before, but it's relevant, I think. Watching Grease as a kid, which was a movie made in the 70s, which was telling a story set in the 50s. And I remember, I think it was my mom or something I was reading talking about how there's no way in the infamous dance scene, Grease, what and dance. I forget the name of the song. It doesn't matter. Here we go. There is no way that in the 1950s there would have been this many women in a high school wearing pants. This was not acceptable for women in this context, in this setting. Now, yes, were there women who wore pants in the 50s? Sure. But they're like women who wear booty shorts or hyper tight Daisy Duke cutoffs or whatever today. They're not the they're not the norm, and they wouldn't be accepted at a typical American high school, just like how girls today can't wear Daisy Duke shorts and spaghetti strap tops in high schools because it's deemed inappropriate. But you see how many women here. I don't want to play too much of this so that I don't get copyright claimed. But, I mean, Olivia Newton-John, here we go, coming out in those tight leather pants, or Rizzo, I can't remember her Stockard Channing, in these short shorts. This would not have happened at a high school in the 50s. There would have been someone probably at the gate telling them to go home and put on appropriate clothing. And especially, you couldn't get away with wearing this top, since it bears the shoulders, in a high school in 2020. So the idea that they could get away with this in the 50s is pure Hollywood fantasy. Now, that being said, this wouldn't have been acceptable in the 70s, probably either. At least probably her shorts and her top, although I don't know that for certain. But these are gender roles. This is what we mean by women. And a lot of TERFs try to say that when trans people transition and they perform gender roles, that they're reinforcing these gender stereotypes. This is a very common TERF talking point, that they're the real gender abolitionists, that they want to eliminate gender, and that trans people, by reinforcing these gender roles, by performing them in their transition, reinforce these gender roles and create a world which wants more of these gender roles, which reifies and reinforces these gender roles, when the reality is trans people do that to help them feel better about themselves and to prevent getting prevent friction, I guess, is a word for it. So it doesn't, because for those who are unaware, gender abolitionism is the idea that we should eliminate gender entirely, that we should eliminate the idea that men have certain responsibilities and capabilities and expectations, and women have certain expectations and responsibilities and capabilities, and we should eliminate all of these. And no. And that is gender abolition. But these TERFs, these gender abolitionist TERFs, think that trans people performing their gender, anyone performing a gender, even if they're cis, is reinforcing these ideas. And while there is a tiny bit of truth to that, the trans people have done more to break down gender roles, especially the non-binary trans people, just non-binary people in general, have done more to break down gender roles than any TERF or radical feminist has done ever, because they've created spaces where it's perfectly acceptable to see a woman-shaped person, someone with the tits and the hips and the long hair and a beard, and being rough and masculine. By masculine, I mean like abrasive and aggressive and assertive, rather than passive and what have you. Hey, KJ, welcome back.
These new meanings are put out into the public sphere, speaking out against it can't get you deemed a transphobe, or maybe even led to you being cancelled, so to speak. And that is a massive...
I am so done with this cancel culture narrative. After the RNC, just their driving in on that is fucking absurd.
Problem. If you want people to understand a new meaning for a word, you need to allow that meaning to progress naturally and to evolve naturally. Just to kind of add a little bit of an explainer on this, a lot of people hear these kinds of languages and always assume, well, it's trans women who are pushing this because they don't want to be left out of the term woman. That's not really what's happened here. Instead, what we've seen is that this relates to trans men or female non-binary people, aka people who are biologically female and therefore have a cervix. And
yes, I thought you'd be here on one of my streams when I talk about that, KJ, but yes, I want to abolish gender.
It's always pointed at this is the more inclusive way of talking about this. But I'm sure a lot of trans men and I'm sure a lot of non-binary people will understand fundamentally that they are biologically female. They would not be trans.
No. Most trans men uh, do not accept that they're biologically female because that's not really a thing. Biologically, a sex like this is typically a turf dog whistle.
Or they wouldn't be non-binary.
How do you figure it's totalitarian? I would argue our modern gender roles are more totalitarian because they tell people from birth how they are allowed to behave. If someone is born with a vagina wants to behave the way a 1950s trad wife would be expected to behave, all power to them. I have no issue with voluntary trad wives. What I have an issue with is society coming in and telling. Good thing I'm not saying how they should behave. I'm saying that people should be free to choose the roles they want to participate in. It's really that simple, KJ. I'm not saying people should behave this way. I'm saying people should be free to choose how they want to behave. And right now, they don't really have that choice in general. Certainly, there's nothing stopping someone from being gender nonconforming in many places, but there are many more places where someone who is assigned female at birth but doesn't, not even if they're trans or non-binary, they just don't like being feminine. They like having short hair. They don't like painting their nails. They like playing with when they're a kid, they like playing with GI Joes and what have you. These gender non-conforming attributes. If someone does that in some areas, they are shunned and frowned upon. That's what I'm trying to eliminate. Abolishing gender means not letting people behave in a certain way. Wrong. Abolishing gender means that society has no expectations about how you will behave or how you will what is expected of you based solely on your birth sex. You're just wrong here. You completely misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm assuming deliberately, uh, because I'm not saying that women have to be assertive and wear pants and not get their nails done. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if a woman wants to behave in a way that we currently, in our current society, view as manly behavior, that should be acceptable and fine, whereas in some places it's not. I'm uses the word abolish in all sort of different ways. I'm using abolish to mean abolish, eliminate, remove from society. See, the problem is that you think it seems from the way you're arguing stupidly that when I say gender abolition, that we'll still have all the same gender roles. They'll still be assigned to women, but it'll be acceptable for men to do this. No, I'm saying eliminate gendered roles. That there is no assumption that women are better homemakers or mothers or parents. That women are more passive, more emotional, less assertive, and that men are more aggressive and more creative or whatever. This is literally something I've seen idiots say, that men are more creative than women. No, no, KJ, no. So when I say abolish gender, I mean abolish abolish the societal expectations that people will behave in certain ways based purely on their birth sex. I don't want to limit the kinds of behavior someone can engage in because of how they were born. I want to make all forms of behavior available for people regardless of how they were born.
Binary if they weren't. So they naturally have to understand that. They cannot be so indoctrinated that they refuse to admit it in a private conversation. And so what we're looking at really is just changing terms and...
How is my language confused? I got 5 viewers right now, so you're not the only one in here, KJ. Is anyone else confused by my language? I mean, if I'm being confusing, I'm not meaning to. But you're twisting my words to mean something I'm not meaning, so you have a nice day yourself.
The way in which we speak to appease a very small minority which ultimately aren't impacted much by this current use of language. Are we really expect...
I'm actually honestly surprised to see KJ. Last time he was in my chat, he accused me of being racist against white people and that you should report my channel. We see how that went.
To believe that a trans man wouldn't understand his risk of cervical cancer simply because the wording says woman. I somehow doubt it. I don't think many trans men...
Nah, this is some bullshit. This is assuming a greater deal of a greater level of participation than most people will engage in. Most men, trans or cis, will tend to ignore any kind of wording which starts with women should. Now, not all, but generally speaking, yeah, if someone says, if a prescription comes out that women should do this, a lot of men are just going to ignore that, even if they're trans men. Because they think of themselves as men, you moron. So, if... And also, by using women in that context, like women should get regular checks for cervical cancer, that also tacitly excludes trans men who can also get cervical cancer. And I'm waiting for her to go in on trans women not having a cervix. This is a common argument I've seen TERFs have. Maybe she won't. Maybe she's smart enough to avoid that argument, but we'll see.
Going to be sitting back and thinking, well, I'm completely impervious to cervical cancer because I've self-identified out of the risk factor. Like, of course they haven't. And, of course, this can lead into trouble if you decide...
See, this is ignoring the effect language has on society. Because if you say women should get regular checks for cervical cancer, and then a trans man goes to get checked for cervical cancer, there's a good chance that if he's got a shitty doctor, that they will reject him or not do the proper tests or what have you. Whereas, and again, trans women can get it too if they've had bottom surgery because they have what's called a neocervix. So it's just inclusive language. I don't understand how they can claim to be the more compassionate, caring group, these TERFs, and claim that that our inclusive language, by saying people with cervixes should get cervical cancer checkups regularly, is somehow bad or wrong, but your non-inclusive language of women, which excludes all trans men, is somehow better language for society. Not even just from a consequentialist point of view. Let me clarify here.
That actually the term should be woman, as Rosie Duffield, a Labour MP, Labour, not horrible right-wing Tory, but Labour, saying...
labor is neoliberal anymore. This is from 1 day ago, so presumably, early August. Ever since the coup against Corbyn, labor has been center right at best, center left at best, really center right.
That, well, this is just another word for woman. And naturally, she got a lot of flack. She even pointed out that, well, this seems like quite a bit of a communist revolution against her, and she's kind of right. I mean, a lot of the people who are pushing these new definitions are certainly on the left to far left. Although, being a Labour MP, she is probably a part of the reason why these people have got so much cultural power in the UK as it is. But despite her politics being right on, as some people might say, she still got into a lot of trouble, and
most of the left and far left people in Britain no longer support the Labour because of what they did to Corbyn, because of how they've thrown away at least the last election, if not the last two elections. And really, from the little bit I've looked into it, British Labour has not been left or far left since the 90s with fucking Blair. So, granted, she's actually the Brit bonger in this conversation, so she would know a little bit more about British politics. But this idea that the British left still identifies with the Labour Party is not my experience.
Now found that people are gunning for her to be removed from the party for unspeakable hate. I mean, this is the same party that has a massive anti-Semitism problem, but,
Bing! This is what they dinged Corbyn on, his massive anti-Semitism, and that it was systemic within the Labour Party, which there's not any real proof of. There was no proof that Corbyn was any more anti-Semitic than any other Labour MP or what have you. So this is just false.
That pales in comparison to using the word woman. All of this is kind of absurd, and if you looked at this from 10 years ago thinking that people would really be arguing about the term woman, then you'd be forgiven for thinking we must be living in clown world, and to be honest, you'd be absolutely right to say that. But a further problem with this,
I don't want to be one of these people who jumps on certain words or phrases as dog whistles. But clown world is a pretty strong, like, alt-right, fasci-right dog whistle. So in fairness, I haven't seen much else to indicate that Rose of Dawn is a fascist. She seems to be pretty much like the only political takes I've really seen from her is her transphobia. So I can't say that with any degree of certainty. But it is just kind of curious phrasing.
this kind of narrative is that it kind of comes from an all or nothing response to language, which we've been seeing quite a lot over the last couple of years. For example, the arguments about whether a woman has a cervix, because some women might have a medical condition which means that they don't have that. And by woman, I am referring to biological human females. And they use this kind of total all or nothing response simply to kind of control that narrative and say, well, because not all women have this or that problem, then you can't say that being a woman is about having that. And that kind of is like saying that the sky isn't blue.
This is the reason why the very simple definition is the one that they hate, which is a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. Because that means that there are people who are women who don't have certain characteristics that they can easily point to. Like, there are women who have penises. There are women who don't menstruate, just like there are men who do menstruate. This is why the sociological definition of anyone who identifies as a woman is the simplest and most correct definition. because it means that we don't have this fiddly definition where you state a definition and then that doesn't include certain people. Uh, to which most of the time they argue that, well, what why does it matter if a trans woman, you know, if they're not a woman, you know, by the definition of an adult human female, this Webster certified definition that they use, which actually let me check if Webster's updated. Definition of woman. Okay. So at least the Google definition. Um, yeah. These are all pretty outdated definitions. Um, simply, the dictionary tends to uh, it's a difference between descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive describes society. Prescriptive makes prescriptions or statements about society. Dictionaries tend to be descriptive, and they take a long time to update. So, in fairness, the dictionary has not updated, but sociology has. Science has.
What I mean by that is, we all take it for granted that the sky is, of course, blue, but sometimes the sky is red, sometimes the sky is grey, sometimes the sky can be all sorts of different colours. So
The difference is when we're talking about the description of the color of the sky, the situations where describing the sky as blue as being both incorrect and not useful is very rare. Like, if you tell someone, I don't know, someone's underwater and they know to swim towards the blue because that's the sky, but it's late in the evening and the sky is washed orange and red like this, and yellow, so there's no blue to swim towards and they drown. Well, describing the sky as blue is not very useful there, but that's also a super duper tiny edge case. Whereas when you use words like woman to refer to a subset of society that should get cervical cancer checkups, then you are omitting a growing number of people who should get cervical cancer checkups because they're not because they're not women. Just like I know there was a stink made about uh, scientific and medical professionals coming out with new language to refer to pregnant people. Using gender neutral language because there are men who can get pregnant. So, and a lot of TERFs were up in arms about this because it destroys the sacred feminine or something. But it's just being inclusive. It's just being complete with the language. Again, this is why the definition of woman as someone who identifies as a woman, I suppose I should mention, I should clarify in there, authentically identifies as a woman, to prevent idiots like Zuby from doing their bullshit. Someone who authentically identifies as a woman, it's a complete definition. It includes everyone who identifies as a woman, but there are some use cases where you, Rose of Dawn, would use woman and would exclude some people who need the information.
So saying that the sky is blue is a false statement because it isn't always blue, despite the fact that we all know that to be a truth. Or how about the ocean? I mean, is the ocean filled with water? Well, it also has ships in it, it also has fish, it also has coral, it has rocks, it has seals. So you can't just say that the ocean is filled with water. It's the same kind.
That's not even close to being analogous. I mean, the sky is blue thing was close to being disanalogous, but that isn't even close. Because there's no part of the ocean that doesn't have water in it. Like, unless we want to get, like, super technical about, like, air pockets deep under the sea, or that where a fish or a boat is doesn't have water in it, but it's technically in the sea. If we want to get super, like, but there's you're not going to go up to a section of the sea and it's just open air with fish swimming around in the air. There's still water there. This is a super disingenuous argument.
Kind of arguments, because it seems to be that you can't make that as a total statement because there's a lot of other things going on around it, and a lot of people don't quite get on board with that, and they're never going to. Why should they? And this also leads into a recent Twitter argument about 2 plus 2 equals 5. You know, that famous saying from 1984. Well, it turns out that even saying that could be transphobic because it's denying the existence of trans women. The left not.
So the 2 plus 2 equals 5 argument is because there are certain situations where 2 and 2 equals 5. But they're super edge case and not necessarily something you need unless you're some high level mathematician. But she's right here. Numbers are completely fake. They are arbitrary and, yeah, extremely large values of 2. But no, there are some legitimate situations where 2 plus 2 can equal 5. I'm not sure how it's transphobic. I'm not super clear on that. Let's see if she goes into this. Oh, she posted this on my birthday. Nice.
Realizing that they're actually showing their cards too early as to how absurd they can really take all of this. We shouldn't be allowing this kind of changing of language to go without
Let me see
that
her.
they're actually showing their cards.
The reason James is saying that though is because the claims that people on the left are asserting non-truths, such as the metaphors criticized for saying things like trans women are women. Oh, hey, I know this person. I think that the fact that Rose of Dawn chose to not include this person's continued response is telling.
Too early as to how absurd they can really take all of this. We shouldn't be allowing this kind of changing of language to go without.
Also, the point of Orwell's 2 plus 2 equals 5 was a example of Orwellian newspeak and the idea that the party could rewrite reality. And a lot of okay, that makes sense now that I think about it. That's what they're saying, that saying trans women are women is like saying 2 plus 2 equals 5. You're rewriting reality. Whereas the difference is that there are situations where 2 plus 2 can equal 5, and trans women are women. Unlike the party in Orwell's 1984, we're not rewriting reality arbitrarily. We have sociological studies and biology to back up our position here.
Without having a proper conversation on it, and that is kind of what we're seeing over the last couple of years. Words are changing their meanings from what we can all know and accept. And hell, even as a trans woman, I understand what the term woman is. I would not be a trans woman if I didn't, and I certainly would have nothing to transition to if the term woman had no meaning. I mean, do I have to point out?
It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have no meaning. It has a plethora of meanings. But none of those are intrinsically tied to biology. That's the difference. That's what these TERFs either can't or won't understand, that there is a difference between saying a woman is someone who menstruates and can have children and They always list all these various things when it's super easy to find women cis women who don't fit those criteria. This is God, I always get these mixed up. It's quantitative versus qualitative definitions, where a person can, or where something fits some of a definition, and so they are that thing that they're defining. Um, they don't have to fit all of them, though. Which is why when a woman goes through menopause, she doesn't stop being a woman, even though she no longer menstruates, she no longer has the ability to bear children, blah, blah, blah. Just like if a woman doesn't have any tits because she lost the genetic lottery, she doesn't stop being a woman because she doesn't have tits. Just like how, if a man is infertile or has an industrial accident and loses his balls, he doesn't stop being a man. There are certain things we use to define women, but there are women who don't fit all of those pieces of the definition. Just like how assertive, aggressive women are still women, even though our typical expectations of women are that they will not be assertive and aggressive.
Out to examples as to why it's absurd to say that anyone can be a woman if they simply say so. I mean, look at this guy. Like, this is some.
I've been granted the honor of being counted with the great GLT Pride mod team. Okay. I'm assuming GLT is like Greater London something. I am a transgender woman who has been chosen to not transition my appearance. It's a double-edged sword because I don't like to make waves, but I also love for people to accept me for who I am. It's like whatever community I'm in, I have a big red target painted on the back of my head. An amazing support for me and has made me feel very loved and appreciated. I'd like to give back to this community of amazing women any way I can. As for me, I love anything travel related and girlies. Please comment your favorite makeup travel tip. I love all of you so much. This is what we're talking about, gender abolition. This person identifies as a woman, but has chosen not to transition their appearance. Whatever, cool, good for them. Good for her. This is it's a little unusual that someone would choose to identify as a woman, transition, identify as a transgender woman, but still have facial hair and whatever. But hey, I have no issue with this person. This is someone who, this is where a lot of the turf rhetoric goes to, is that someone like this is identifying as a woman to get into women's spaces so they can rape women. The idea that someone like this, there is literally nothing stopping me from following a woman into a bathroom and raping her if that is my desire. And I would still be charged with rape. If you allow someone like this into the bathroom and they rape, it's still rape. It's still wrong. They will still be charged and still face repercussions for that. But this is the idea that they try to keep women safe space because men rape. And while, as I've said before, most rapists are men, that doesn't mean that men are all rapists or that we have some sort of biological predisposition to rape.
Someone who is now apparently a moderator of a lesbian group called Girls Love Travel. And that
Girls Love Travel, okay.
Person is a non-transitioning trans woman who is happy staying as a guy, but still wants to be referred to as a female and still wants to use female.
So there are a number of reasons why someone could do this. As I said, it's somewhat unusual, but reasonable. If they have a family that they are reliant upon, who would no longer support them if they physically transitioned. if they know that they would lose their job and have a hard time finding another job, if they, especially if this is a Brit bonger, which I have no way of knowing, I don't know, but there's a lot of turf sentiment in England, so I would call it Turf Island. Um, it they could be there could be any number of reasons why they choose not to physically transition. There are any number of trans women on social media who are not able to transition in real life. I know someone, they're here on YouTube. Their channel's Oreo. She identifies as a woman. She changed her Twitter handle to Lynn. But she just posted recently that she can't do that in real life, or she hasn't done that in real life. I'm assuming for similar reasons, like I've said. There are people in her real life who would uh, not handle that well, would not accept her as her transition. It could just be that she doesn't want to deal with family that way. As I understand it, she's fairly young. I believe still in school. I believe in college. But there are a number of reasons why someone may choose not to do this, all of which are valid, including the reason they just don't want to physically transition. The day on Facebook, saw a post from a trans woman who was a master carpenter and can't find work because she chose to transition. Exactly. I imagine it's incredibly difficult for trans women in the trades, because they may have all the experience. They may have grown up with a hammer and a saw in their hand and know everything, but trades tend to look down on women. It's very hard for women to break into the trades. They pretty much have to create their own trade company and brute force their way to respectability by just doing things, because a lot of people won't hire women to do these things, which is fucking ludicrous. I've known plenty of women who were more than capable of doing the kind of work you do in carpentry or any other trade. It's absurd.
Pronouns and loves all things girly, so it's therefore a woman. That's the kind of person, when we talk about the term woman not being open to everyone, we don't want people like that to be able to take advantage of it. And when I say...
How is she taking advantage of it? Please explain how she's taking advantage of the definition of woman.
About trans women being women, again, that I understand that there's a lot of trans women out there who completely understand biology and why we transition. But when you open these terms to mean absolutely nothing, you do allow abuse, and that is why there are a lot of people getting upset.
It doesn't mean nothing.
As to why they can't just identify as a woman anymore. So the next thing that I want to talk about is...
No one is saying that you can't identify, that no one can identify as a woman or whatever. No one is saying it doesn't mean anything except you. You're the ones who are saying that woman doesn't mean anything anymore. You're the one saying that.
New segment for Trans Stupid, where I'm coming across a lot of articles, say like it's from the Crazy Vault, where people have said some incredibly insane stuff in various editorials, and it goes under the radar. But I kind of want to put a spotlight on some of this, because some of these are very, very, very special. And this week's special topic is why the term transition is transphobic. So apparently the author of this is someone called Mux Van Levi. Now, Levi is a therapist and a counsellor and is also non-binary, biologically male. And this is someone basically telling the rest of the trans...
So, on a guess, I'm assuming that he's going to say that transition is transphobic because it presumes that there is that that they were something and now they're something else. Whereas most rhetoric around trans people is that they were, like you see this a lot about the Matrix, how it was written by two trans women, even though at the time they were written, as far as the public knew, the Wachowski sisters, I think, I believe that's the name. It's been a long time since I gave a shit about the Matrix. Um, Even though at the time they were, as far as the public knew, two regular cis men. But this idea that someone is born trans and that it takes time for them to realize it. This is where the born in the wrong body rhetoric comes from. I'm not sure how I feel about that kind of rhetoric, and I definitely, uh, as far as I'm concerned, disagree with the idea that transition is transphobic. Because there is definitely, even if we accept the rhetoric that trans men or trans women are born in the wrong body, but they were born trans, so there's nothing for them to transition to. There is still, generally, at the very, very least, a social transition need to be made to transition from whatever their assigned gender at birth was to what their accepted gender is, man to woman, whatever. So there is at the very least a social transition to transness. That's so I have a feeling I will also disagree with this Van Ethan Levi, whatever. But I understand where he's coming from. And it could be that this is useful for some people, but I think making it a blanket statement like that, and it could be just that the title is clickbait, that means nothing. Let's see what she says about it.
Community not to use such a phrase because it's insulting to him, somebody who isn't transitioning. This kind of leads into why a lot of people like myself get very frustrated with the non-binary community when they pretend to speak for us, as though they have some sort of special insight.
This is where it gets really muddy, and her referral to the non-binary community as if it were a monolith is a little problematic, because the non-binary community is not a monolith, and there are some who do take steps to transition. One very famous one here on Twitch, Lumiru, is going in for top surgery here soon. I think like today or tomorrow. Like it's very, very soon. They were assigned female at birth, and apparently they suffer from tremendous dysphoria from having tits. And so they have taken steps. They have the ability and resources to eliminate those causes of dysphoria, and good for them. I wholly support that. There are other non-binary people who do also take steps to transition. But there are other people who identify as non-binary, and other than maybe like wearing makeup or if they were assigned male at birth, or painting their nails or what have you, there are other things that non-binaries. There are plenty of non-binaries who don't transition. There are also plenty of non-binaries who do, in some respect, transition. And I could definitely argue that just saying, I'm non-binary, please use these pronouns to refer to me, is something of a social transition, but I'm not willing to get too deep into that argument. It's not worth it. So I disagree that transition is transphobic. I am curious. I might look up this article later to see if he has some more nuance about it in his in this article.
That the people who actually have a lived experience of being trans don't somehow have. But let's have a look at some of the really bizarre claims that he makes in this article. The term transition is based on the idea that gender looks a certain way, and people need to change from looking, sounding, acting, and more a certain way for their identity to be respected. Well, yes, that is perfectly fine. If you are transitioning...
I get this guy now. He's one of these hyper woke people who believe that this statement here, which is rooted in transphobia because they're basing it off the idea that men have penises and women have vaginas. Interesting that he pluralized men but not women here. That's an interesting typo. To which I would say that while there is certainly some transphobia to this idea, when dealing with older people, not just adults, I'm talking about like teenagers, younger, people who have a fully constructed identity about themselves. This is a matter of social simplicity, I guess you could say. And by that I mean, in our society, as it currently exists, there are some decent reasons for assigning a gender based on external genitalia. And while I am advocating for a gender-abolished world where we wouldn't do that, in our current society, I feel that it is counterproductive to accuse doctors of transphobia for saying that a kid born with a penis is a boy. Like, I understand that there have been a number of experiments with that parents have undertaken where they don't gender their children. They don't have they don't buy pink clothes for their children with vaginas. They don't buy dolls and whatnot. But the problem I have with many of those experiments is that they generally don't eliminate the social factor. They still let the kids watch TV. They still let, as the kid gets older, get on the internet, get on social media. They still let them socialize with other children who maybe don't have that. This means that there are gender identities people can develop when they are even if the parents don't explicitly gender the child or their environment, society will gender children. So I disagree with this rooted in transphobia language because it implies this is different from like certain behaviors that are rooted in white supremacy, because we can show how the system was developed to bias against non-white people and towards white people explicitly. How systems developed around this idea of white supremacy and that still exists today. This is the argument here is that centuries, millennia ago, when we created the man-woman dichotomy, it was specifically designed to erase trans people or to ignore the idea of someone transitioning, which is just not the case. It's cultural inertia has kept it in place. And I agree to fight against this, but this is not how you do it.
From being a man to a woman, you will need to look the way that society expects a woman to look if you want to be treated as such. You cannot simply change the definition of woman. We talked about this earlier. You can't change the definition of woman just based off a committee. It is going to be something in which society has to accept. When we are born...
See, this is funny, because basically what she's saying is, you have to behave like a woman if you want to be a woman, and you can't change the definition by committee. You have to change society. Well, how do you change society? By having people perform differently. By having this dude here, the GLT Pride mod, who identifies as a woman but has not chosen to physically transition, that is one effective way to change society. And they don't like that we're trying to change society, so they're saying that we're trying to inflict our ideas on people, when really most trans people just want to be left alone to live their lives. And I mean, there's definitely some who are advocates for their worldviews. But this idea that they've got this idea that there's some, again, shadowy cabal who is trying to change definitions of words against society's will, when really that shadowy cabal is just the scientific and medical community, the sociological community, who have made observations about individuals and society, and have stated that this is the way society works, and now individuals in society are attempting to change that society. It's a slow process, but no one is trying to well, I guess I shouldn't say no one is trying to change words. There's definitely people trying to change the words we use. They're the people in charge of defining those words mostly.
Doctors assign us a gender based on our external genitalia, which is rooted in transphobia because they are basing it off the idea that men have penises and women have vaginas. Well, generally women have penises. Generally women have vaginas and men have penises. Like, that's always been the way throughout.
Slipped up there, didn't you, Rose? Almost said the truth, but couldn't have that. Yeah, I've already been over this.
Human history until basically the last couple of decades, really. I don't think that back in ancient...
There have actually been many, many ancient examples of people changing gender. This is a pretty common turf argument that transgenderism is only a few decades old. No. Especially if you go outside of the white paradigm, there have been more than two genders. There have been people who transition, who change their gender, and even, God, I'm trying to remember what this. There have been roles in society which came with a gendered pronoun, which was completely disconnected from the gender you were. This is something that I've seen in a lot of kind of military, generally spoof movies. But the idea that when addressing a superior officer, you address them as sir rather than ma'am, even if they are a woman. Now, I don't think that's how it actually works in the military, certainly not in 2020. But that is an idea that officers were male, so they would be addressed using male pronouns, even if they were somehow a woman. So this is one of the things that these TERFs and anti-trans people don't get, is that gender is a social construct, which means that it is not set in stone by any means. It is purely based on the society it exists in. And if there's a societal usefulness of being able to change gender, or being able, or having a gender outside of the penis vagina dichotomy, as has happened in other societies, then that will develop. Our current bimodal binary gender model is just the one that our society has developed, largely thanks to European expansionism and imperialism and white supremacy, and Christian hegemony. There are plenty of other societies, even in ancient Europe and ancient America, who had, or still have, if they still exist, more than two genders.
In Egypt or ancient Rome, they devised this whole system just to bring down the tranners in the 20th century. But, who knows? The reality is we are who we are, and our outside appearance does not change who we are on the inside. We then navigate the world with the assumption that if a doctor told me so, then this must be true. For some of us, who we are does not match what the world has told us. The term transition implies we were once one gender and are now another, but that is not the case. We are and always have been our gender. It may have just taken us a while to find the words, support, understand knowledge, and or much more to affirm ourselves and our identities. Our outward appearance does not dictate and/or represent who we are. While your outward appearance does at least indicate how others will treat you. If you look like this, for example, you are not going to be treated as anything other than a man. That's simple as. But then when this guy is talking about...
That depends on where you are and who you're interacting with. I guarantee if... I don't know if those last two pictures were the same person. I think they're two different people. If they went to if they went to Pride and had a name tag on that identified their pronouns, they would be treated as a woman just like any other woman. It depends on who you're interacting with and where you are. Again, there may be a very good reason why the guy in the Facebook post there, the GLT Pride dude, hasn't physically transitioned in society. Actually, let me rephrase my statement there, because I made it seem like just not wanting to is not a good reason. There is a very good reason why he hasn't transitioned. It may be that he doesn't want to, or it may be, as I said, there are other societal factors preventing him from doing so. It could even be as simple as not having the means to do so. If she lives in America, it's very expensive to transition in America. It's very difficult to do so.
How we were one gender and are now another, I don't know whether I can really agree with that. Whilst I've certainly known throughout my life,
I'm going to speed this up a little bit.
Trans or along those lines, I still spent a good period of my time before transitioning living as a male. So I've had those experiences, and then transitioning into being a woman has given me a whole different set of experience.
There's no one way to understand gender nonconforming or anything. Therefore, changing how we look on the outside is not a transition. It's like getting a nose job, liposuction, butt implants, and okay. Yeah, she's picking on someone who has a very minority opinion that is basically just. This is something I've seen, and I'm not accusing the person who wrote this of being a woke scold, although they kind of seem to be a little bit. But this is something that I see a lot of woke scolds engaging in. Not just woke scolds. They envision a better world. They have a vision for a better world, a world they want to live in. And instead of working within the existing world to create that world in reality, they choose the Adam Savage Mythbusters I can't remember. I always get them confused. The one who doesn't look like a walrus. His method of I reject your reality and replace it with my own. Adam Savage, thank you. They assume that their vision for society is the world in which they live in. And they behave as if anyone who doesn't recognize their reality is the deviant one, is the one who doesn't uh, accept society, accept reality as it is, and they're in the wrong. And while I would love to be able to do that, I was a virtual adept when I played Mage the Ascension. I loved their idea of personal ascension, of creating your own consensual reality. That is not the world we live in. We create reality as a society. So if you want to create that perfect world in your head, you can't just brute force it onto other people by telling them they're wrong. You have to advocate and change people's minds in reality, using reality and real world rhetoric and examples. This person is trying to skip steps to the point where we recognize that gender is a spook and doesn't exist as the skipping the step to where everybody in society, the vast majority of people in society, recognize that gender is not a real thing, that you're not transitioning, you're just realizing, you're affirming your true gender. Okay, but that's not the society we live in. In the society we live in, if someone is born assigned male at birth, but they aren't comfortable in that body and want to become a woman, they have to transition, even if it is only socially. Even if it is only, don't call me Steve, call me Isabel. I go by she, her pronouns now. Even if that is the extent of their transition, it's still a transition. It is still a change from one mode of behavior to another.
And I, therefore, have kind of built my own knowledge of the world based on those two different experiences which I have had. It's not enough just to say, well, I was always been a woman, because I certainly have not always been treated as one. If I had been, then I would not be.
Also, it's interesting, I don't know if she's going to get to this point. It is important to recognize that the term transition has been and is continually used and weaponized against trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and or more identities as a gauge to see if someone is something enough, and or to assimilate what society has dictated, social constructs, of how people need to look, feel, act, sound, and much more. So, this is basically common turf transmed rhetoric that you're not trans if you haven't transitioned enough. Also, where does he think the trans in trans person comes from? Is because they're transitioned or transitioning. Like, again, I support his goals, but I don't support his rhetoric here. He's skipping the steps of getting society on his side.
Be transitioning. When a cis person takes hormones that the body is not producing enough of, we do not label their experience as a transition. Yeah, the reason.
I'm guessing she's about to say the same thing I am, because they're not transitioning. Because they're taking something they're deficient in, they're not trying to change something about their body. And denying that taking transgender hormones, estrogen if you're AMAB, testosterone if you're AFAB, denying that is a change, that is a transition of the body, is literally denying reality.
For that, by the way, is because if a man needs to take more testosterone, it isn't because he is less of a man or is needing to become more of a man or anything along those lines. Similar with a woman who's going through menopause, that's just medical treatment. When you are doing a medical transition, however, you do.
This is disingenuous as fuck. God, I hate. I'm gonna do a transphobia. When trans people like this are as toxic to the movement as people like Rose of Dawn. When a trans person takes hormones that their body is not producing enough of, we slap on the label transition. It's not that their body is not producing enough of it. It's that there's a dissonance, a disconnect between the mind and the body is not producing the proper hormones to make the mind happy. So we have science to fix that. If a guy takes more testosterone, either because it's prescribed by a doctor or because his because of other reasons, the that's not a transition because they're not trying to change their presentation or uh their they're not trying to change anything about their identity. When a trans person takes hormones, it's because they are explicitly trying to change their identity and how their body functions. When you take hormones that your body is not producing enough of, but not in a transition sense, it's because your body is deficient in some way, typically.
Kind of need to go through various medical processes if you want to be comfortable with your body. The fact that this guy actually tries to compare the two,
I don't know how much longer I'm going to go on with this.
Well, I don't have any words for that, really. The rest of the article is just discussing terms like internalized transphobia and talking about how problematic basically everyone is. But it ends with this fairly strange paragraph. Our community is suffering and experiencing chronic violence while accepting the knowledge cis folks are imposing on us. We justify that it is okay because our oppressors, whose oppression we are unaware of most of the time, have empowered us with language for our experience. Can you see the irony in someone who holds privilege and power empowering someone on their own experience and/or identity? Well, I kind of play the card there a little bit on where they're coming from. A lot of this is very postmodern. A lot of this is kind of Marxist in nature, talking about positions of privilege and oppression. I don't really see it in that way. I don't think many people really do.
Privilege and oppression is only... Calling that Marxist is a little dog whistly, I think.
This isn't a case that we are experiencing chronic violence, as I've discussed on numerous occasions. Ultimately, these are just the ramblings of a mad zer or whatever. But I want to kind of feature more of these on my channel. So if you come across any, please send it in the email down below. I'll be glad to have a look at it.
Yeah, I'm done. She's just gonna ramble for 5 more minutes, and I've already been doing this for an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah, she's literally calling on her audience to send her more people she can harass and send her audience. I mean, she doesn't have a huge audience, certainly orders of magnitude more than I do, but yeah, she's basically telling her audience to send her articles for people who say something she disagrees with so she can harass them because she disagrees with them. Like, it's one thing when you take apart a medical paper or a sociological paper, because that is something someone has put out to be critiqued. But when someone just posts, like, I don't even know, she doesn't. Oh, Buck Angel weighing in, nice. She doesn't even have a link to it, so it probably was like a Medium or a blog post or something. But yeah, I guess from the something about Posey Parker, I don't care. This is stupid. Rose of Dawn is stupid. She either doesn't or willfully chooses not to understand science and sociology. So we're done here. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to like, share, and leave a comment because it helps me. Subscribe and ring that bell to help you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.